Today's gonna feel a little bit, or this section or breakout session is gonna feel just a little bit different. It's more intimate. I'm gonna probably lean into my teacher mode and not the big stage sort of presentation. But that's why we're here. We're really here to kind of get into the nuts and bolts. And my hope is that I'll be able to keep to time and then maybe get a few questions afterwards. But I want you to know that the team thought of everything. So we have like a Q&A right after this. So you'll have a little bit of a break. We'll be done about 11:35. You'll have a 10-minute break or so. Then we'll be back together. So get your Q&A ready if I'm not able to answer your questions. And then we'll be signing books if you want just personal time. So let's dive in. So as Will and I mentioned, thank you so much, Holly, appreciate it. As Will and I mentioned, we have created resources. I don't know if we mentioned that. You probably were wondering how we even got together. So in 2020, our publishers said, hey, you guys need to sit down and have a conversation. So we were both working for the same publishing company. Neither one of us had ever written a book. And we were talking about some of the same themes. So I was doing blogging and podcasting with this company. Will was actually, as a pastor, traveling around talking to teenagers in schools. So he wasn't doing spiritual talk. He was talking about suicide prevention and mental health. And just based on the trends that I was seeing at the time, I went from concerned to disturbed. So I started sort of sounding the alarm. And the publishers were like, you guys need to sit and talk. So we had a conversation and we started working on a book about how to see teenagers, kids and teens. It was titled Despair initially. And can I be honest with you? I dropped into a pit of despair. I'm not even gonna lie, because it was so heavy. And at one point I said, I can't walk into a room and look at a manuscript every single day called Despair. So I felt it. So again, words are powerful. So we wanted something more hopeful, more uplifting. And that's where we came up with Seeing. So then we started traveling around when the book came out. And as God would have it, as only God does, the book came out in 2020. When parents were just desperate for how to help their teenagers who were really struggling after COVID with the social distancing, not having the spring sports, the graduations, all the things. You guys remember what life was like. So that was God. That was God's plan. And then as we were traveling around the country, people were like, okay, but what about my littles? Because I'll be honest with you, Seeing, you can read it in 2 hours. Looking back on it, we focused a lot on teenagers, because that's what we were seeing in terms of what the data was pointing out. But when parents came to us, they were like, we're starting to see some things. And then at first we were thinking, based on the research, the older kids were struggling, but the younger kids are okay. They're at home, they're playing, they're fine. And then the new data dropped. Has anybody seen it? In 2025, we started to see the research that pointed to kids who were born around the pandemic time. So that means your kiddos that are 5 years old, 6 years old right now. My friend just mentioned 5-year-old twins. Not all of them, but a good bit of them were showing regression. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I would go to ministry conferences like this, do parent talks. The ministry leaders will pull me aside and say, I'm seeing some things I've never seen before with littles. Kindergarten teachers that I've even counseled were telling me, and I wrote it in my new book, the intro, that they were thinking about leaving the profession. What? Kindergarten teachers? They're the ones that get all the hugs and the loves and the gifts. It was hard. So we're starting to see that we want to pay attention to our kiddos and our preteen and give them the emotional resilience that COVID took, because and that's part of it, if I'm honest, we were so stressed during that time. And then the kids, some of the kids, not all kids, some kids are doing just fine, but some of the kids were picking up on that. And then I'll go into all of that. So that's sort of the background on why I wrote a book to focus on parents of younger children. And then also not selfishly, it wasn't selfish at all. Personally, raising a child with special needs, God was saying to me, you got to speak on it. And I kept saying, I'm not an expert. And God said, you're an expert of one. And families need to feel seen. So I included a chapter on raising neurodivergent kids who have ADHD, kids who are highly sensitive, because that's also what we're seeing. There's a growth in the population of kids who have special developmental needs, and parents were feeling so stressed out. So in today's conversation, or this next 35 minutes that we have together, it's gonna feel a bit more intimate. I'm gonna rely on my notes because I don't wanna miss a thing. We're gonna talk about what behaviors that you might see as a parent, a leader, a grandparent, in your grandchildren, in your students, in your child, that you might worry about. And I'm gonna tell you which ones you should worry about and which ones you shouldn't, because that's really important. Sometimes we worry and we don't have to. And I think it's my job as a therapist to say and to educate, no, you have so much to worry about. This is actually normal, a part of age development. We're gonna talk about how to decode what's happening in your child. It's sort of an offshoot of what we just talked about with seeing, and we'll go a little bit deeper into some of the themes that I see with children. And so I want you to have something to see and pay attention to, so you're attending or taking care of your child in a way that's connecting to what might be happening. We don't really know. Oh, let me finish the next one. And then we'll go into the specifics of if you have a child with high anxiety and a child who may be angry, because we're seeing some of that. How is that connected to anxiety? How's that connected to emotional resilience? And tools that you can use today. I'm not even gonna say tomorrow. Tools that you can use today to meet your child's emotional needs. And so for you to feel equipped, and this is important, take a look at this slide. I am seeing a lot of this. And I didn't need data to tell me that 48% of parents are feeling overwhelmed most days about parenting. Why don't I need research? Well, because I talk to parents all the time. I do monthly corporate webinars for big name companies, Lululemon, Google, McDonald's, Tesla, and one of the highest or most frequently requested topics from these big tech companies, parenting. And another one is insomnia. Just, a little tidbit of information. And we have a slew of presenters. They asked me to do a lot of the parenting ones. Sometimes 300, 400, 1,000 people are on. And so I knew that parents were struggling. And then I started paying attention as I was writing my book. Parents of younger kids were jumping on these calls, asking a lot of questions. So parenting has always been a wild ride, as I say. But then when you add in all that's been going on in the world, all that's been going on in this community, all that's going on in the country and in our families, parenting feels more stressful than ever before. And I don't know of a parent that doesn't want to get it right. They just need tools. They just need resources. And I know for myself as a parent, they need encouragement. I need somebody to tell me, I'm doing a good job, right? You're carrying a heavy load. So I want to say that to you already. You are doing a good job. The fact that you are here, amen, tells me that you are already an amazing parent. So let's kind of dig into why parenting demands are so high. Well, how many of you fall into any of these circles? How many of us are feeling financial pressure, right? How many of us are parenting kids with special needs? This church has 300 families that are 300, individuals, which is amazing to me. I remember when I didn't know where I could go to church with my kid with special needs, right? This is so fantastic, and it's still hard. We need a village. Some of us are parenting kids who aren't biologically our own. So sometimes there's a bonding issue that occurs there. I didn't mention, but my Jalen, who's 22, is my bonus daughter. And we are very connected, but that took a lot of intentionality. And that took a lot of me looking the other way with some things with mom down the line, like years ago, like just trying to make that relationship work. I know how hard that can be sometimes. Some of us are parenting solo. That's really, really hard. And we're trying to get our kids out the door. We're trying to help them with homework. We're trying to find childcare. I have parents, I see adults in my practice too, who are already worried about camps for this summer. And with good reason. You got to get on it, people. Come on. But it's true, right? My parent friends are already having, sign up, hurry up, refresh. And I'm like, refresh, because the registration will say close, and then you refresh, and then there's availability, a free tip, right? To get your kids in these camps. It's like, gosh, it's just, we're juggling so much. And so there's no wonder that parenting can feel hard and heavy, especially modern day parenting. So I sort of debated putting this picture in. I love visuals. Will was with me actually. Went to a church in Arizona that had never talked about mental health ever. And they were really nervous, and we could tell because weeks leading up to the event, they would ask a lot of questions. They wondered if we would use certain words, and they definitely didn't want us to use the S word, right, for suicide or shooting. And I was like, I don't know, I can come. I talk about real stuff. And they're like, oh, okay, well, how can we, it ended up being amazing. And let me tell you what this church did. They wanted to, they were like, okay, if we're in, we're gonna go full throttle. So they wanted to open up a conversation that had not been had at this church about mental health. And as soon as we walked in, we came in a day early, they showed us this wall. And they said to us, we wanted to have some sort of visual representation for what kids were going through. It's kind of sad. Yeah, it's bummy, but you see, I don't really have a sad look on my face because I'm like, we are having the conversation and it's needed. Look at the dots. And I took some time, and that's just like a third of it. It was maybe 3/4 the size of my back wall. Huge. And kids were like, and then what they shared with Will and I is that afterwards, kids started opening up and families started opening up because they felt like there was a lot of shame. They knew that there was a lot of shame that families were carrying because their kids were struggling. And then it started to lead into groups for adults, moms and dads who were dealing with depression and didn't feel like they can bring it to the church. So the fact that you are here is huge. And I love that the church is playing a big role in this. And it's needed. So this is where I'm going to look at my notes. Younger children, according to the research, raised during the pandemic show an increase in developmental and emotional regression. So if you have a 5 or a 6-year-old, chances are they have a friend who's struggling, right? And what areas are they struggling in? Well, the research shows language, social, emotional. These kids aren't unintelligent, but what do we need to build up our language skills? We need other people. And I don't know about you, but I was working on Zoom and then doing Zoom school with my kids. It was a lot. It was a lot. So we're seeing this not just in our country, but Israel. Like I saw data from all over the world. But in our country, 35.8% of kindergartners, this is 2025 family, this is not 2023 or 2022, study that just came out last year, September, almost 36% of kindergartners were struggling in one major area of development. And when I talk to teachers, they go, yep. So teachers are having to play catch up. Kids are having trouble with waiting in line. task persistence. If you say, time to sit down, tie your shoes, Johnny, there'll be a 20-minute meltdown, right? So these are things that we're seeing in our kiddos, and it's not that it's all just abnormal, but we're seeing it across the board with a certain sort of subtype or subgroup of our population that we thought initially after COVID, we're doing okay, right? And so let's keep going. Kids are dealing with anxiety, impulse control, high levels of overwhelm. 11% of kids between the ages of 3 and 17 have a diagnosable anxiety condition. So it's not, we all worry, we all have stress. Anxiety is not abnormal. Anxiety does not make you have a mental health condition. I have occasional anxiety. These are kids who have anxiety that makes it difficult for them to show up for school, show up for church, make friends. 3 years old, right? The mental health of Black youth, let's speak on it, right? I care about all kids. And if any child is struggling, my heart breaks. But what we're seeing in the data is that kids who are Black, specifically Black boys, are having elevated rates of suicide. What? There's just a lot to unpack there, right? Younger kids, 5 to 12, and then nearly 20% of children between the ages of 3 and 17 have some sort of mental, emotional, or behavioral or developmental challenge. So why are parents stressed again? Right? Why are educators stressed? So there's a lot. So like we talked about earlier, I'm not here to harp on the problem, but I want to tell you, it's almost like a thesis statement, right? I want to give you the reason why I spent and devoted over a year on this topic and why I find it just a privilege to talk to young parents or parents of young kids. So what we are seeing is that there is something that helps. As we heard in the keynote, you are the something that helps. But there's also another psychological construct called emotional resilience. What in the world is that? Remember we talked about grit? This is another word for grit. So this is us going deeper. We had one little chapter and scene about grit, and then that's the thing that most people ask us about. So I went deeper. Like, how do we develop grit in an anxious child, an angry child, a child who has special needs, a child who is highly sensitive? So my book, Calm, Courageous, Connected, breaks it down. But in general, that's what we want for all of our kids. But what is it? Emotional resilience is the learned ability to handle stressful situations. So if you get knocked down, and this is how I talk to my teenagers, life is going to knock you down. If you get knocked down, what happens? Well, what do you mean? Are you going to stay down? Or are you going to get back up? But here's the thing. I don't tell them, get back up. I say, look for your resources. Look for your tools. What do you have inherent within you? Because God has given you some things. And what do you have to look outside of you? And when you are down because you got hit with that curveball, Dad's hurting mom, parents are separating, the world is wild, somebody didn't ask you for prom, somebody posted your name on the bathroom wall and said you did something that you didn't do, right? When the curveball comes and you get knocked down, will you even know that help is available if your head is down like this? So emotional resilience doesn't prevent our kids from being knocked down. It gives them the tools, the awareness, the capacity, the fortitude to look for help and figure out how they can climb back up. But I want to highlight a word in that definition. Learned. Too often parents and teachers think that a kid has it or they don't. No. Yes, kids that grow up in conditions that are suitable and optimal for tackling the wild world, they have more of the capacity, but it's still learned because they see it at home. So what are the benefits? Well, kids with higher resilience, look what the research says. You can look this up today. I've looked at probably 100 different studies. I'm like, is there something different? Is there a nuance thing? How can I frame it differently? What about families that live in the South? What about families that live in Hong Kong? I've looked at it. This is the same here as it is in New York, as it is in China. Kids who are emotionally resilient, and a lot of what we talked about is what helps to create the conditions in the household, what Will and I have already talked about. Look what they get. They feel safe to problem solve. That's the grit part, right? That's what we want. They feel safe enough to learn new skills, right? They feel confident academically. They actually have better grades. That's what the research shows. And in China, they're leaders. Kids who are emotionally resilient, and parents have sort of done some of the stuff that we talk about, they then become student leaders. And their student leadership sort of makes other kids want to come to them, so they feel more confident, right? And they feel like they could be leaders. And then they learn communication skills and conflict management skills. So they're able to manage their emotions well. Does it mean that stress won't come? Nope. Does it mean that they won't experience a crisis or a setback? No. The Word of God already says this, right? In John, in this world there will be trouble. But do you have the skills to be able to contend with the trouble when it will inevitably come? And here's the final nugget. This is sort of the linchpin or the connecting point between mental health and emotional resilience. Kids who are emotionally resilient have a lower risk of depression, anxiety, and then the research says substance use later on in life. But doesn't that make sense, right? If I don't learn at 8 and 9 years old how to deal with the problem, at 15 years old, how am I going to deal with the problem? Somebody's going to say, I got a way you could deal with the problem. I'm going to be like, let me try it. Oh, this helps because now I feel nothing. That's the way that I deal with the problem. And these people do get married. And that's a whole nother, I'll come back for that, Stephen. Couples marriage talk, right? So we're gonna get into it, right? I hope I've set it up why this is so important and what the benefits are, but how do we do it? There are probably a study will say 7 things, another study says 10 things. This is how I teach parents to do it. This is what I have been trying to do, and it doesn't mean that my kids are perfect or that they will ever be, but this is the intentionality behind it. We want to decode emotional storms. We want to practice curiosity. We want to model self-regulation, and we want to teach emotional regulation skills, not because you are a therapist, but because as parents of littles, you are the primary teacher, right? So I'm going to offer things that are kind of, he's supposed to be moving. Let me see. Oh, man. My friend in the back, is that Jake? Can we make him move? That's okay. He was supposed to be having like a fit. It was awesome. That's okay. That's all right. It was like what do you call those? A gift. Yeah. He was like, I was like, this is great. I got to bring it to my church friends. So decode emotional storms, and it's okay. He was fine, and then he wasn't. Anybody have a kid that's fine? then they're not? A parent in Hong Kong pulled me aside and she said, he gets into it with his brothers, he beats the wall, and I was just sort of listening, and then I saw a tear roll down her eye, and I said, you're scared of him. And she just bawled. She goes, I'm scared of my own kid. I've heard that before. Right? Let's begin to decode these emotional storms because it can feel overwhelming and sometimes it can feel scary, right? And so when we are understanding a little bit of child development and what's expected, even if it's a little bit like, oh my gosh, this is a lot, you as the parent are going to feel more equipped, which means you're going to feel more confident and you're going to feel like I can handle this and I can weather this storm. So what's happening in the brain, we've sort of covered this already, not sort of, that's the whole crux of SEEN, and that's why I think SEEN has been helpful as people tell us around the world. But let's just kind of break it down. So as a reminder, the thinking happens on the logical side, the left side of the brain. So that's rational thought. That's the part that helps to calm big emotions, but that's also the part that's able to sort of, process language. But when the right side of the brain is activated, high emotional arousal, the left side of the brain's functioning decreases, because this is a big bear in the woods. So I don't care about your you're saying it's a mouse. No, it's not. I don't care about your logic, right? So this is taking up a lot of space. So think about your 2-year-old, your 4-year-old, your 5-year-old, your 10-year-old, when they're having these big emotional storms, the instinct is survival. They're probably not going to hear, I've told you before, we've went over this, the rule is that. Do they need to hear it? 100% yes. What I'm saying to you is in that moment, they just can't, right? They may hear the last trigger word, like, why can't you be more like your sister? She's gifted. Somebody may have said that, right? And then that's like a big thing. And the parent's like, what did I say? I reminded them about the rules. So it's not to blame the parent, but in that moment, something has triggered the child and the emotion is surging. So the left side of the brain is what helps with impulse control. Remember, our kids are struggling with that. That's what helps with problem solving. That's what helps with calming down. So we have to utilize all those things that we just talked about earlier. Okay, I see that you're upset. Do you need a minute? Do you need a hug? Let me tell you something that really helps with emotional regulation, specifically anxiety. Water. Hydration. This is with the adults who've had severe trauma, right? When we're talking about something, I was like, okay, let's pause. Let's take a deep breath. The breathing is helping, but then let's take a sip of water. That makes a difference. So it's really slowing things down, not going straight to the correction, the lecture, the discipline, not yet, right? Because they may not even remember what they've done or what you've said. And another piece of education that I offer parents, it's been super helpful to me, meltdowns are normal. Did you guys know that? And the reason why is the brain is still developing and kids are still trying to figure it out, right? So that occasional tantrum, the drawing on the walls, the putting the teddy bear in the toilet and then screaming at you about it. And then you're left with like a $200 plumber bill. You know what I mean? Like them freaking out and you're like, wait a minute, you're freaking out? Yeah, they're still trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure out how to manage frustration and disappointment. Imagine that your 3-year-old kind of wants to say, my bad, Mom, but instead they throw a fit, right? Or they feel shame. But there are things that are age appropriate. So let me break it down to you. This is like a whole child development class, but I'm gonna try to go fast. Low intensity behaviors, such as being naughty, defiant, impulsive, and yes, stealing occasionally is considered normal. Did you know that? I have been on webinars where fathers are just so, parents in general, but I remember this one dad, he was just like, I spanked my kid and we do not steal. We are a Christian family. And I was like, how old's your kid? 4. Okay, there's a lot of conversations to be had there, right? But him just hearing, it's normal. It's not right. But if your child is engaging in that behavior, they need correction 100%. But dad was feeling like we would never do that. And I don't want my kid to get in trouble. Like, I got that, right? But we want to see what's normal versus what's concerning versus what we need to act on quickly. So if your child, here's a takeaway, it's on this slide. If your child has a tantrum every now and again for 2 weeks, maybe you count 4 times, 5 times, that's not a big deal. If your child has a tantrum every single day at home, at school, at church, that's a big deal. Meaning we just want to look closer and get the baby some help and get you some support. And this is based on research, my friends. 20 minutes. I've seen in schools doing observations a child have a meltdown for 15 minutes. It is the longest 15 minutes for the teacher, for the class, for the principal. I'm just taking notes, right? At first, I don't intervene. I'm just taking notes. But the research shows if a child has a 20-minute tantrum, that child's having a lot of difficulty self-regulating, right? So we may need to give the parents and the child more tools, especially if it's happening multiple times per day or multiple times per week. But it is normal. 80% of preschoolers are gonna have tantrums. So just something to think about. And again, I can't stress this enough. If you are the parent of a younger child, remember their brain is still developing. A lot of what you see that feels like really overwhelming is actually normal. And then we're gonna look at some things that I consider red flags. I've been working with teenagers since I was here in Athens as a school counselor. Now I work a lot with adults and families with younger kids as well. I do a lot of consultation, but for years my practice would get a call. And when I say my practice would get a call, it would be me, because I would pick up the phone. Hi, Dr. Williams' practice. Before I grew. Hi, I was all official. And then the parents would immediately go into what was going on. And sometimes I could even hear like tears. And I'll say, okay, before you continue. And they're like, and they did this, and all of a sudden they've changed. And I was thinking, I don't know if they're on drugs. And I'll say, is your child 13 or about to be 13? I'm not kidding. 75% of the time, the parent said yes. There's something about 13. With boys, 14. I can't point to a specific data point other than what we know about hormonal changes, development, and what's happening in culture. But if you see a child that's pulling away from you, that's more aggressive, verbally aggressive, or isolating or withdrawing, at 13, that's actually considered normal. There's a line, so we'll take a look at that now. This is one that you might want to take a picture of. So this is what's a child, what is a sign that a child's brain is still growing? We call it growth moments, versus a red flag. So this is probably one of the most common questions that I ask. How do I distinguish what's normal versus what requires deeper levels of support? Between the ages of 3 and 6, tantrums, hitting, throwing, kicking, pulling the dog's tail is normal. What's a red flag is you've done every single thing that you know what to do, and they will not calm down. Okay, that's really, really tough. And they're actually not connecting with anybody in the family. There's not a big sister that can calm them down. Grandma can't calm them down. And they don't even really engage with other people in the family. 6 to 9 years old, being irritable, being defiant, that is actually normal. People don't realize when adolescence really starts. Every single book will say 12 years old. Does anybody know when adolescence actually starts? It's not 9. No, it's 10. Mostly 11. But if you have a 10-year-old that's asserting their independence, they're like on the outer edges of adolescent development. So take a deep breath, put on your seatbelt. It's going to be rough for a few years, but they will come out of it. They will come out of it. But we actually are seeing it younger and younger. Years ago in the literature, it was 12. And 13 does seem to hit sort of like a peak point. If your child is persistently aggressive, that's multiple times per week, multiple times per day, excessive anxiety, their personality seems to change. They don't want to go to school. They don't want to do the things that they love. That's when we want to be concerned. And then 10 to 12, this is where we're going to probably see, this is when parents will say, this was like my great kid. He was so like obedient, followed all the rules, did great at school. I'm starting to see some things. Well, moodiness and defiance is a hallmark of adolescence. They're going to be moody. They're going to withdraw. Now, this is what I tell parents. If your 10 to 12-year-old is withdrawing from their friends, that's a red flag to me. I just want to know more. So regardless of if this is supposed to be, expected developmentally, it's going to push our buttons. And that's where I really want us as parents to have compassion, make jokes, use humor, talk to other families, come to seminars like this because now you feel more equipped. You can help your neighbor. That helps you to feel more confident. Some things are worth just an eye roll as opposed to you getting your heart pressure up, right? And they also need consequences, right? But definitely see what's going on behind the behavior. I believe in consequences, I do. But I want to know first, is this an emotional thing or what's going on? Then I provide support and not a consequence. So practice curiosity. So we're trying to figure out what the heck is going on. So let me tell you what typically is underneath anxiety and anger, big theme perspective. This is what I've seen for about 18 years when I'm talking to kids behind closed doors. There's been some sort of change in their life, in their routine, in their connection. That's why COVID was so upending, so terrible. Lots of different changes. What's underneath anxiety? Fear, sadness, right? We're like, oh, they're just worked up. What's really going on, right? Let's ask a question. There may be a very specific fear or an emotion underneath like sadness. So this iceberg, my friends, let me back up, is a metaphor that indicates that anger and anxiety is what we see that's visible, but there's usually so many things that it's masking that's underneath. So what would it be like for us as parents to just take a minute to be curious about what's going on? No matter what the child, no matter the age of the child, every child wants to feel agency. And that's a fancy psychological word for independence. They want to feel like they can do it. When we take power away from a child, oh, they're really upset. So that's why it's so important to give options. Ones that you are good with. You can go to bed at 9 or you can go to bed at 9:15. You can have eggs or you can have eggs with hot sauce. That's what I tease my kids. You want hot sauce on a baby? I don't want eggs. You want some ketchup? That's a joke, but that's actually a strategy. What are things that you can tolerate? Then the child chooses and they feel like they have some control. You get it? It works even with really young kids. I can't tell you how many one was 7, 2 were 10, came into the office with suicidal thoughts because of bullying. And they did not tell their parents, nor did they tell their teacher, and the school had a no bullying policy. But in the quiet moment when they felt relaxed enough and safe enough, all this acting out that parents were like, who is this kid? And they're disrespectful and they're this. And now they say that they're suicidal. What's going on? Bullying. So I highlight that because I think we need to take it more. It's one of those things that comes up over and over again when children go to the hospital. I've worked at a psychiatric hospital and they come into the hospital for self-harm. So let's investigate. And it happens at younger, we don't think of it that way, but it does happen. Anybody remember Saved by the Bell? Remember Screech kept getting put in the locker? And we were like, okay, well, that's bullying. It's different now. And then puberty, as I mentioned, puberty starts earlier. Most research studies will say 11. I've seen as young as 10. And then let's nail it down further. Those are the big themes. Now just look at your child and their environment and what's happening. And I asked that question, what's the antecedent? What happened right before the behavior? Like it's a full behavioral analysis that you don't have to do as a parent, but it is worth paying attention to what those common triggers are. And definitely if you have a child with special needs, they're very sensitive to being hungry, being tired, a change in routine, a transition. Okay, now we're done with English. We're gonna move over to science, but I'm not done with English. If you tell a child that they're playing, but now it's time to pack things up and get ready for dinner or get ready for bed, you may see a huge tantrum. That is one of the most common triggers, transitions from play to something that's more structured. And for some kids, perfectionistic kids, from structure to play. Come on, it's time to rest. It's time to, they're thinking like, I'm behind, I'm losing time. Like, what do you mean play? I don't want to talk to this person. I want to finish my math. So every child's going to be different. Feeling misunderstood is a big one. So one of the tools that I offer is modeling self-regulation. So do you remember the story that I shared about my Noah? Picking him up and he was upset and I was just trying to make things light and it wasn't working. The part that I didn't really get into is, maybe I did share, it was like a hard day. There was some things going on for me that day and it wasn't the day that I normally pick him up. My husband was supposed to pick him up. My husband had some things going on. I felt like I was juggling being a mom and a professional and I wasn't getting it right and I was late. So even though he had his behavior that would have been annoying anyway, I was stretched thin. Have you ever felt stretched thin as a parent? Yeah. Parenting is hard. And if you are arguing with your spouse, if you're not getting along with a family member, if your manager is discounting your contributions or not seeing you or not paying you, these things come up and it impacts the way that we show up for our kids. So I give you so much compassion because I've been there. And I also want to tell you that you have the power to change the temperature. So I actually wrote this recently. I don't normally share this. It just came to me because I've been flying a lot lately. Will and I just came back from like a 20-hour flight from Hong Kong. And one of the things that I notice is that when we hit turbulence, the pilot will come on and he'll be really calm. He'll say, so we've hit a little bit of rough air. And he'll talk real slowly and I'm like, and we are gonna need you to put your seatbelts on. And if you're in the bathroom, get out right now. But strangely, I feel calm. Like initially I'm like, what's he telling me? But that voice, like they go to school for that voice. They get selected for that voice. Why do they use that voice, my friends? Because their calm will transmit to us to help us to feel calm. Has the turbulence changed? No. But him making it seem like it's gonna be okay, or her making it seem like it's gonna be okay, helps me to feel more steady. So you are the anchor for your child. So this is something that I teach graduate students. It's like an entire course, remaining calm for your clients, right? We have to work on our own nervous system. So the biggest thing that I can say to you in the next couple of minutes, because we've got to start to wrap up, is that neuroscience tells us just simply pausing. I call it the pregnant pause. 10 seconds before you say anything, you do anything. Doesn't even matter. Therapists will say, take 3 deep breaths, and that works. I like just going outside. especially if it's a nice day, just touching some grass. My kids, they get more worried when I say nothing. Like, where are you going? So you don't have nothing to say? It's actually really cool. And then you respond. So 10 seconds, this comes from neuroscience, just 10 seconds, just to take a sip of water, revisit the conversation that takes you from reaction to response. And then this is what your kids can do. I'm gonna go through this quickly. Tear something up, draw something, and I'm not kidding about tear something up. Give your kids some paper that they can rip. I mean, remember back in the day, kids, boys especially, that were like considered hyperactive, we put them in football. In China and Europe, they put them in rugby. Lacrosse, a lot of my clients play lacrosse. That's an aggressive sport. Soccer is aggressive. We're like, let them get it out on the field, right? But what if your kid doesn't want to play, doesn't want to wrestle, right? I give my teenagers all the time and my little kids in my office, let's just rip up paper. How do you feel? Strangely calmer, right? Scribble. I had my child with special needs when he was really little, 4 or 5 years old. His drawing would be so intense, but then he would be calmer, right? The color would be like the crayon would go from here to here. Like, oh my goodness, let's buy some more. But that was helpful. We want to experiment, right? When children are calmer, so we already talked about the feelings wheel, huge fan of that. Emojis help kids figure out emotional language. That does help with emotional resilience because the scientists say when you say it doesn't change the situation, but if somebody receives it like, yeah, that sounds rough, that's a lot, that's the emotional exhale. So teach your kids how to recognize their feelings, how to say their feelings, how to use I statements, and how to breathe. So for littles, I have like so many different breathing techniques. When it's cold, hot cocoa breath, you're holding hot cocoa, but wait a minute, you can't sip it just yet because it's super hot, but mom put cinnamon and nutmeg in it and cardamom so you can smell it. Smell, 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 smell. All right, now it's ready to blow. You're ready to blow. Kids need something tangible. For my boys, the tactile piece. My friend David Thomas talks about combat breath. Boys like that, right? They want to feel strong, like, yeah, like you got this, you can breathe through this. So you draw a box as you're breathing on your body. Girls can do it too. We just call it box breathing. For boys, we call it combat breathing. Breathe in, hold, breathe out. Breathe in, hold. You can hold and stay still, or you can hold and go down. I actually like holding and staying still, and then breathe out. And why do we say it's combat breath? Well, guess who learns how to breathe like that? Navy SEALs. Do you guys know that? So they can stay calm in the face of battle or threat. So we give our kids tools. We don't just say, pull it together. And we teach these things when they're already calm. We have a book out there called Beyond the Spiral. Will and I wrote it together. It's got kind of counseling tools for managing anxiety and panic attacks. And then each chapter has my counseling tools. And then we have gospel spiritual tools. So it's really powerful. Your anxiety will lie to you. We want to speak back to it. So I'll let you take a picture of this. We won't have time to go over it. We've got to wrap up in just another minute. So talk back to it, right? Anxiety is real, but the things that it says to us, we're not capable, we're not okay. Sometimes anxiety tells us we're not real, dissociation. We want to talk back to it, right? And then gospel truths. I'll let you take pictures. I love some of these are my favorite verses, but whatever works for your child. For God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. You have the power to overcome. It may take multiple tools, but I love having a foundation of spiritual truth. And then here's what I want to leave you with, my friends. Again, you being here is just huge, and you don't have to get this right all the time. You won't get this right all the time. I don't get this right all the time, and I've written books on it. But the most powerful thing you can do, and it's considered good enough parenting, is when you mess up, you repair. When you have a rupture, you repair. We're not parenting the kids from back in the day. Remember, our parents were like, I messed up, so what? Maybe. Kids want to know that you know you messed up and that you want to fix it. You want to connect with them, and you can do it in whatever way is natural to you. When I messed up with Noah, I was like, buddy, I am so sorry. He's 6. I am so sorry. I had such a rough day, and I took it out on you, and I shouldn't have. And I'm going to try to do better next time. And he's a kid, I promise you, he actually wanted to come today at 10 years old. He'll come to me, he's like, Mommy, you look a little stressed. You want a hug? So we're also teaching a lot. So we are a little bit over our time. I want to thank you for your time and your attention. If you have burning questions, please let the team know, because Will and I are going to do a Q&A. And if you want to stay connected, I do have a free newsletter that I send out every month, that you can just go to my website, drchinwewilliams.com. Thank you so much. God bless.